Captain Elena Rook had always believed that peace was a hard-earned, fragile thing, one that humanity would protect with its last breath. But standing on the charred remnants of Velinor's capital city, she realized how easily it could all be wiped away. Fires raged across the horizon as the sky above darkened with the heavy smoke of a burning world. The alien warships that had attacked the colony hung like vultures in the sky, their sleek, silver-black shapes unmistakable, the Zelvar. Elena had been off-world on a diplomatic mission when the first transmissions came through, warning of an unidentified fleet approaching. By the time her ship, Aurora's Edge, had returned to Velinor's orbit, it was too late. The Zelvar had descended like a plague, laying waste to the planet in hours, sparing neither man, woman, nor child. The last transmission from Velinor's planetary defense fleet was a brief, frantic cry for help before it was silenced. Elena's mind raced, but her body had already acted on instinct. She had gathered a handful of survivors, civilians, soldiers, engineers, anyone who could help her escape the inferno consuming the planet. But as she saw the ruins of the city below her, memories of happier days on Velinor washed over her. This was her home, her people, and now it was all gone. The colony, once bustling with life, was reduced to ash. She gripped the railing of the escape pod, her knuckles white. The faces of the dead haunted her, and every time her eyes closed, she saw the flash of alien weapons, the screams of the dying, the crackling of exploding buildings. A cold rage built inside her, a fury so intense she could feel it burning in her chest. The Zelvar were savage, but this was the work of something darker. This was no mere raid, it was a massacre. As the pod broke through the atmosphere and ascended into the cold vacuum of space, Elena's gaze locked on the stars. She was numb to the grief, numb to the pain. But something had shifted deep inside her, something she hadn't expected to feel, a resolve. The thought of justice, of vengeance, burned brighter than any grief. The comms crackled to life, and Elena heard the voice of her XO, Lieutenant Callan Brace, steady but tinged with the weight of what they'd just witnessed. "Captain, we've received word. The Zelvar are already moving to other systems. They won't stop until they've eradicated every human colony in their path." Elena's jaw clenched. She had once fought in the military as a commanding officer, leading humanity's fleets in a war that now seemed distant, almost unreal. But in her heart, she had always believed peace was the way forward. She had been wrong. The Zelvar had no interest in peace, and neither did the shadow that lurked behind them, the Vortke. "Set a course for the Zelvar homeworld," Elena said, her voice cold and unwavering. "We're going to make them pay." "But, Captain," Bryce hesitated, his voice filled with concern. "We don't have the fleet. We don't have the firepower. We're outnumbered." "I don't care," Elena replied, her voice hardening. "We have something they don't, the will to fight. And that's all we need." As the ship turned toward the unknown, Elena knew she was embarking on a path of no return. She would find those responsible for the destruction of her home, and she would make them regret the day they ever decided to cross humanity. The Avenger had awoken within her, and nothing would stop her now. The journey to the Zelvar homeworld took longer than Elena had hoped, but the time on the Liberty's dawn was not wasted. As the ship drifted through the void of space, Elena's crew trained relentlessly. The ship itself, though old, was still one of the most advanced warships humanity had ever built. Its weapon systems were outdated, but Elena knew how to fight with the tools she had. In the cold silence of the ship's control room, Elena stood before a star map, studying the Zelvar's territorial holdings. Every time her eyes passed over Velinor's burned-out system, a knot twisted in her gut. But there was no time for mourning. The Zelvar's reign of terror had to end. The crew consisted of the few survivors she had managed to rally from the wreckage of Velinor, and those who had joined her cause willingly. Lieutenant Callan Brace, her ever-loyal second-in-command, was by her side. His eyes, usually filled with the sharp clarity of a soldier, were clouded now with grief, but he followed her lead without question. "We should make contact with the fleet command, Captain," Bryce said one evening as they gathered around a holographic table, displaying the human military's fragmented operations. "There's a chance we can rally the remaining forces. A few ships, even a handful of pilots, could make a difference. We can't do this alone." Elena shook her head, her brow furrowing as she clenched her fists. "The fleet command is scattered, Callan. The remnants of the fleet are either too far away or too disorganized to be effective. Half of them are probably too afraid to engage in open war again. If I wait for them, the Zelvar will raise every colony in their path." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Callan pressed. "You're talking about a war without reinforcements. You can't take on an entire empire alone." Elena's eyes hardened as she turned to the screen again. She wasn't going to sit around waiting for the military to regroup. She wasn't going to let the Zelvar continue their assault while they hesitated. "I'll go to the last people who can help us," Elena said, her voice low but firm. "We need to find the resistance groups, the mercenaries, anyone who's willing to fight. Humanity might not be able to field a fleet, but we're not alone in this. There are others out there who hate the Zelvar. We'll build an army from the scraps of what's left." And so, Elena set a course for the uncharted space beyond the reaches of the known galaxy. The deep fringe, where the lawless lived, where mercenaries, bounty hunters, and desperate survivors made their homes. There, she would find a way to strike back. As they entered the outer rim of the Zelvar-controlled sector, Elena's ship received a cryptic signal, one that seemed too important to ignore. The message was brief but desperate, a voice she recognized instantly. "Rook, I don't know if you're still alive out there, but if you are, you need to hear this. I have information about the Vortkai. The Zelvar aren't just working for them. They're being controlled." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static in its wake. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The Vortkai, the alien race she had heard whispers of but never seen, the shadow behind the Zelvar. Elena knew that whatever it was they were after, it was far darker than she could have imagined. The mystery deepened, and with it, the stakes grew higher. "Who sent that message?" Callan asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I don't know," Elena said, her eyes scanning the coordinates that had been embedded in the transmission. "But we're going to find out." They had no choice. To defeat the Zelvar, they needed more than just firepower. They needed to understand the force that was driving them. And perhaps, just perhaps, this mysterious contact held the key to ending the war. With her mind set, Elena ordered the ship to follow the coordinates, deeper into the unknown. The road ahead would be perilous, and the allies she needed might not be easy to find. But Elena Rook was no longer just a captain. She was an Avenger, and nothing would stop her from getting the justice her people deserved. The coordinates led them to an uninhabited system in the farthest reaches of known space. A barren world orbited a dying red star, and amidst the desolation, Elena spotted a wrecked station, half buried in the frozen atmosphere of a moon. It was the source of the mysterious transmission. The station's comm systems were still active, barely holding on as if desperately reaching out for help. Whoever had sent the message was either long gone or waiting for a rescue that never came. As the Liberty's dawn approached, Elena's crew prepared for the worst. "Stay alert," she warned, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "This place might be a trap. We don't know who or what's waiting for us." The landing was rough. The station's exterior was a jagged ruin, its once pristine metal now scorched by blaster fire and pitted with the scars of age. Elena led a small team through the crumbling corridors, her boots clanging against the steel floor. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. The flickering lights of the station barely illuminated the way as they moved deeper into its heart. Elena's pulse quickened. Whoever had sent the message clearly hadn't expected to be followed. They had to have known the risk, an isolated location, no means of escape, a weak signal. It was almost as if they were testing her. "Keep your weapons ready," Elena ordered, sensing the tension in the air. "And remember, we're not here to make friends." As they navigated the maze of abandoned control rooms and storage bays, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It wasn't the cold silence of an abandoned station. It was an oppressive presence, something far more intelligent, far more calculating. When they finally reached the central hub, a half-destroyed comm room, they found the remains of a human. Well, what was left of them? The body was hanging from a broken support beam, a gruesome reminder of the price some paid to deliver a message. Elena approached cautiously, her stomach turning as she recognized the uniform. It was from the long-forgotten resistance fleet, a faction that had once fought the Vork before being wiped out. This was one of their own. Beside the body, a small data pad flickered weakly, its screen damaged but still functional. Elena snatched it up, quickly reviewing the last few transmissions. What she read made her blood run cold. The Vork, she now knew, had been manipulating not just the Zelvar, but nearly every major power in the galaxy. Their true goal wasn't mere conquest, it was far more sinister. The Vork had been conducting experiments on various species, harvesting the bioenergy of their planets to fuel a weapon capable of eradicating entire star systems. The Zelvar were nothing more than pawns in their grand design. As Elena absorbed the information, a cold voice echoed from the shadows of the room. "I see you found the truth." Elena spun, her blaster already aimed at the figure emerging from the darkness. The voice was calm, composed, almost too calm. A figure stepped forward, an alien with sharp, angular features and pale blue skin. His eyes glowed faintly, unnatural in their intensity. He was tall, lithe, and moved with a predator's grace. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, her voice sharp. The alien smiled, but it was not a comforting gesture. "I am the one who warned you. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to understand. The Vork are not just your enemy, Captain. They are a threat to all life in this galaxy. And you're far from the only one they fooled." Elena's mind raced. He knew too much. "Who are you really?" The alien tilted his head, as if savoring the moment. "My name is Ralzar, and I was once part of the Vork, until I learned the truth. They are not conquerors. They are parasites, feeding off the life force of the galaxy. I defected when I realized that their plans would destroy everything, including the last remnants of my people." Ralzar stepped closer, his eyes locking with Elena's. "You cannot defeat them alone. But together we can. The resistance is scattered, but if you rally enough forces, we might just have a chance." Elena hesitated. She had no reason to trust this alien, but his words were too aligned with what she had suspected. The Vork were more than just another enemy to be fought. They were cancer, and it would take everything humanity had to excise it from the galaxy. The silence between them stretched, and then Elena made her decision. We'll fight them. Together. Ralzar's smile returned, but this time it was a promise. Then we begin. The war is not over, not by a long shot. As the station's failing lights flickered one final time, Elena knew that her fight had just taken on a new and more dangerous dimension. The real battle was about to begin. The decision to join forces with Ralzar had come quickly, born out of necessity more than trust. Yet, over the following weeks, Elena found herself leaning on his knowledge of the Vortkai and their intricate network of manipulation. Together, they began forging alliances with the scattered remnants of the resistance, hoping to create a united front. But the further they traveled through the galaxy, the more Elena questioned her ability to trust the enigmatic alien. His motives were still unclear, and he had an air of someone who had seen too much, a being who knew the galaxy's darkest corners too well. Despite the unease in her gut, Elena kept her focus. There was a war to fight, and the Zelvar were only the beginning. The Vortkai's grip on the galaxy was tighter than she had realized, and if she had any hope of defeating them, she would need to unite those who were willing to fight. But the tension on the Liberty's Dawn began to grow. The crew, many of whom were survivors from Valinor, had not signed up to fight alongside aliens, no matter how noble their cause might seem. Some were uneasy around Ralzar, and it showed in the whispers, in the glances exchanged when he wasn't around. Elena knew that leading this fractured crew would be as much about keeping their morale intact as it was about leading them into battle. Then the unexpected happened. It began with a routine mission, a strike against a Vortkai outpost located on a desolate moon. Intelligence indicated that the outpost was heavily fortified, but would yield vital information about the Vortkai's long-term plans. Elena had hoped that the mission would provide more clarity about the enemy's next move. Instead, it became the beginning of something much darker. They were ambushed. As the Liberty's Dawn dropped out of warp and entered the moon's atmosphere, they encountered not just the expected Vortkai forces, but also a fleet of Zelvar warships, far more than they had ever anticipated. The battle was brutal, far more intense than any of them were prepared for. And just as the fight reached its peak, a transmission came through on an encrypted channel. Elena's stomach twisted as she heard the voice on the other end. "Captain Rook," the voice said, smooth and cold. It was unmistakable. It was Jax Mara. Jax, Elena whispered, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the war ended, not since the betrayal that had separated them. He had vanished, swallowed by the chaos of the galaxy. And now he was here, alive, and clearly aligned with the enemy. "How nice of you to join the party," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. The pain she had long buried under layers of duty and anger surfaced at the sound of his voice. Jax had been her closest comrade during the war. He was once a brother in arms, someone she trusted with her life. But that trust had been shattered when he had disappeared without a word. "Don't play coy, Elena," Jax replied, his tone dripping with disdain. "I've been keeping an eye on you for a while now. The Resistance, the freedom fighters. You're so naive, don't you see? The galaxy is changing, and you're clinging to a dying ideal. The Vortkai understand that. They understand how to shape the future." Elena's pulse quickened as Jax's words pierced her like daggers. "You're working for them. You're aiding the Vortkai in their genocide." A bitter laugh came through the combs. "No, Elena. I'm doing what you could never do. I'm securing a future for humanity, one that doesn't involve endless war, one that ensures our survival." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the battle raged on. But Elena's world had shifted. Jax, the man she had once considered family, was now a tool in the Vortkai's grip. She had never imagined he could betray everything they had fought for, let alone side with the very force that had torn apart their lives. As the Liberty's dawn emerged from the moon's atmosphere, barely escaping the overwhelming Zelvar assault, Elena stood on the bridge, her fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. The betrayal stung deeper than any physical wound could. "Captain," Ralzar's voice broke through her thoughts. This was no ordinary ambush. Jax was never meant to be a mere distraction. He's a message. They know you're coming. Elena's eyes narrowed. Jax's words echoed in her mind. The galaxy is changing. What did he mean by that? And more importantly, what had happened to him to turn him against everything they once believed in? "Then we'll make them regret ever underestimating us," Elena said, her voice cold. "And we'll bring Jax back, alive or dead. He'll answer for this." The battle ahead was no longer just a war against the Vortkai. It was a personal vendetta, and Elena would make sure that Jax Mara understood the price of betrayal. The Liberty's dawn drifted into the dark abyss of space, leaving behind the shattered remnants of the Vortkai outpost. Their narrow escape from the Zelvar fleet had come at a high cost. The ship's hull had taken heavy damage, and several crew members were injured. Yet it was the psychological toll that weighed heaviest on Elena. The battle had been brutal, and the thought of Jax's betrayal gnawed at her like an insidious parasite. It had been years since she had last seen him, but now that he was an enemy, the wounds felt fresh. Elena stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. Her thoughts were consumed with Jax, his voice, cold and devoid of the warmth she once knew. How could he have fallen so far? What had the Vortkai promised him that was worth everything they had fought for? She had always believed Jax to be a man of honor, someone who, no matter the odds, would never forsake their cause. But now, in the wake of his betrayal, those beliefs felt like fragile illusions. A soft beep interrupted her thoughts. It was the ship's internal communications system. "Captain, we've got a problem." Lieutenant Brace's voice came through the speaker. "I think you should see this." Elena's gut twisted. Another threat? Another trap? She made her way quickly to the bridge, her mind racing. Whatever it was, she knew it wouldn't be simple. When she arrived, the entire bridge crew was gathered around the tactical table, staring intently at the holographic display. Elena could feel the weight of their eyes on her as she stepped forward, but she ignored the tension in the air, focusing on the mission at hand. "What is it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Lieutenant Brace pointed to the screen. A set of coordinates blinked, indicating a remote, uninhabited world at the edge of the galaxy. "We intercepted a transmission on a private channel. It's encrypted, but we've managed to crack part of it. It's a message from Jax. He's trying to make contact." Elena's heart skipped a beat. What's he saying? Brace hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "It's a warning. He's telling us to stay away from the planet, says it's a trap. He also mentions that we're being hunted." "Hunted?" Elena echoed, her brow furrowing. "By whom?" "Not sure yet. But he says they're not just Zelvar forces. Whoever they are, they're after us, specifically you." Elena's mind raced. Jax had never been one to leave things to chance, especially not when it came to her. His message wasn't just a warning, it was a threat, veiled in some twisted form of concern. The very fact that he was still trying to communicate, still trying to manipulate her, confirmed one thing: Jax wasn't the same man she had known. He was something else now, something darker. "We'll check it out," Elena decided, her voice filled with determination. "Set a course for those coordinates. Prepare for anything." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, But no one questioned her. They had all learned long ago that Elena Rook never hesitated to make the tough calls. She had led them through countless battles, and they trusted her judgment, no matter the risks. As the ship adjusted its course toward the coordinates, Elena turned away from the crew, her eyes narrowing with resolve. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was personal. Jax had sold out, but Elena would find him and make him answer for what he had done. But as the Liberty's dawn made its way through the cold void toward the planet, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than a simple ambush awaited them. Jax's warning had been clear. They were being hunted, and whomever was behind this knew more than they should. In the depths of her mind, Elena wondered if this was the beginning of a far greater conspiracy, one that extended beyond the Vorkai, beyond even the Zelvar. Something that had been pulling the strings from the shadows all along. Something that had been orchestrating this war for far longer than she had ever realized. "Captain," Bryce's voice broke through her thoughts again. "We're approaching the planet's atmosphere. I suggest we take it slow. There's no telling what we might find down there." Elena nodded grimly. "Keep your eyes sharp. If this is a trap, we're walking right into it. But we won't back down." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their impending confrontation. No one spoke as the ship's engines hummed, and they neared the dark, desolate planet. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine, the realization settling in that the man she had once trusted was no longer the ally she had hoped for. The Liberty's dawn descended toward the planet's surface, and Elena steeled herself for whatever awaited them. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a fight to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The atmosphere of the planet was thick with sulfur and dust, casting an eerie glow over the barren landscape. The planet's surface was rugged and lifeless, a graveyard of broken rock and twisted metal, as if some ancient war had ravaged it centuries ago. The Liberty's dawn descended into a valley, where the planet's natural features hid the structures beneath. Elena could feel her nerves tightening with each passing second. Jax's warning echoed in her mind. It's a trap. But if it was, then it was one they would have to walk into. The ship's landing gear thudded against the cracked earth with a heavy finality. The crew was already on edge, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons as the ship's engines powered down. Elena stood at the front of the bridge, her mind still racing. There was too much at stake now. She couldn't afford to be distracted by the personal betrayal of Jax. They had a mission: stop the Vorkai, free the galaxy. But that meant finding out what Jax was mixed up in, no matter what. "Prepare to disembark," Elena ordered. "Stay in groups. No one moves alone." Lieutenant Brace nodded, rallying the team into action. They gathered their weapons, checked their gear, and followed Elena's lead as she stepped off the ramp of the ship and into the thick, murky air. The cold wind carried the faint scent of decay, and the distant sound of what could only be machinery hummed through the silence. Elena's instincts screamed that they weren't alone. The team moved cautiously across the barren valley, scanning the horizon for any signs of life or movement. There were no signs of civilization, only scattered ruins of what looked like a once thriving facility, now abandoned and left to rot. Some of the structures looked familiar, decayed, old human-made technology, but Elena had no time to dwell on the mystery of it. "Where is it?" Elena muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the facility Jax had mentioned. A sudden flash of movement in the distance caught her attention. Her hand went to her sidearm instinctively, but Brace stopped her. "Hold on, Captain. It might be a trap." Before Elena could respond, the movement grew clear. Figures, humanoid shapes, cloaked in tattered garb, appeared from behind a row of damaged structures. They weren't Zelvar or Vortke soldiers. They were human. "Show yourselves," Elena called, her voice firm but steady. The figures hesitated for a moment before one of them stepped forward. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, his stance wary but not hostile. "We're not here to fight," the man said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't spoken in a long while. "We're the ones who sent the warning. You shouldn't be here. This place, it's already claimed." Elena's pulse quickened as she took a step forward, eyeing the ragged group. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted nervously to the others, a sense of urgency in his movements. "The Vortkai aren't the only ones hunting you. You've walked into something much worse. These people." He hesitated, his words thick with fear. "They'd been waiting for you." Elena's mind raced. Who were these people? And why were they so terrified? Before she could press further, a loud mechanical whirring noise echoed in the distance. The ground trembled slightly, the air vibrating with the sound of engines coming to life. The figures around them stiffened in fear. "Move," the man shouted. "Get to cover. Now." Elena barely had time to react before the sound of heavy footsteps, like something massive, began to echo from deeper within the ruined facility. The ground beneath them rumbled as something enormous emerged from the shadows, a mechanical monstrosity that seemed to have been designed for one purpose: destruction. The massive figure was humanoid in shape, but far too large, its legs built like hydraulic pistons, its arms bristling with weaponry. It was a war machine, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The kind of weapon that could turn the tide of any battle in seconds. The Vortke's creations, Elena realized, but not one she had ever seen before. The cloaked man ran toward Elena, panic in his eyes. "You don't understand. They've been breeding these things in secret, machines designed to hunt down anyone who opposes the Vortke. They've already wiped out half the resistance." The war machine's eyes flashed with a blood-red hue, and it raised a massive cannon, locking onto Elena and her crew. The others scrambled for cover as the first blast rang out, tearing apart a nearby structure. "Move, Captain," Bryce shouted, pushing her toward a jagged rock outcrop. Elena snapped into action, urging the crew to stay low as they ran for their lives. The figure, Jax, and the mission she had been on now all seemed like fragments of a nightmarish puzzle she couldn't put together. The Vortke were far more prepared than she had realized, far more insidious. And whatever this war machine was, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of how deep the conspiracy ran, how far they had gone to control the fate of the galaxy. As the dust settled around them, Elena Rook understood one thing more clearly than ever. The stakes had just been raised, and now there was no turning back. The massive war machine continued its relentless march toward them, its heavy steps shaking the ground with each thunderous impact. Elena's mind raced. The machine's cannon was already primed, and there was no way they could outrun the blasts. They had to fight, but how? They were outgunned, outnumbered, and in an unfamiliar terrain that worked against them at every turn. "Get to cover. Now," Elena shouted, snapping into command mode. The crew scattered as the first blast from the war machine struck, sending a plume of debris flying into the air. Elena ducked behind the jagged rocks with Bryce, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of the massive weapon charging again echoed in the distance. "Captain," Bryce said breathlessly, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell are we supposed to do? That thing's unstoppable." Elena looked out from their cover, studying the war machine's movements. It was slow but deliberate, and it carried a terrifying array of weapons. Yet, there was something about its design, something too deliberate, too perfect. She didn't believe it was just a weapon. It was more than that. It had a purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it wasn't just about killing them. It was about sending a message. "We can't fight it head-on," Elena muttered. "We need to find a way to disable it. There's got to be a weak point." The war machine fired again, sending another round of destructive energy toward their position. Elena's eyes narrowed as she spotted a small cluster of pipes and wiring along the machine's flank, exposed and vulnerable. If they could get close enough, they might be able to sabotage its power core. But that would mean getting past its defenses. "Bryce, get the others in position," she ordered. "We'll need a diversion. I'll make my way around the side and hit its power supply. If I don't make it back, you're in charge." Bryce didn't hesitate. "Understood, but we're not leaving you behind, Captain." Elena nodded, her gaze steely. "Just make sure that thing doesn't get another shot off." The plan was risky, but it was the only one they had. As the crew took positions behind nearby cover, Elena moved swiftly and quietly, staying low and using the terrain to her advantage. The war machine was too focused on the rest of the team to notice her creeping along its flank. She could hear the heavy hum of its engines and the calculated movements of its massive legs, each one a reminder of the horrors the Vortke had created. Her pulse quickened as she approached the exposed side of the machine. The small cluster of pipes she had spotted was just ahead, but getting there would be a challenge. The machine's sensors were scanning the area, its red eyes glowing like the maw of a beast. Elena held her breath, inching closer. She could see the cables that ran into the core, a network of power lines that connected directly to the machine's weapons system. One well-placed shot, one well-aimed strike, and it could all come crashing down. She reached into her pack, pulling out a small but powerful explosive charge. It wasn't much, but it was enough to disable the machine's core temporarily. If she could plant it and get back to the crew, they might have a shot at escaping. But she had to act fast. The war machine turned, its sensors locking onto a new target, a crew member trying to draw its attention. Elena cursed under her breath. She had to move now. With a burst of speed, she sprinted toward the machine's exposed side, her heart racing in her chest. The machine's cannon powered up, but Elena was too quick. She slid behind a large piece of wreckage and planted the charge on the exposed wiring. The moment it was set, she dashed back, narrowly avoiding a blast from the war machine's weapon. "Get ready." Elena shouted into her comm. "I set the charge. Get out of there." The crew reacted immediately, sprinting toward the ship. Elena had no time to wait for them to make it. She had to trust them to get out alive. As she turned to follow, the war machine fired again, but this time it wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed at the exposed charge she had just planted. "No!" Elena screamed, watching in horror as the blast from the war machine's cannon collided with the charge. The explosion was deafening. A shockwave rippled through the air, knocking Elena off her feet and sending her tumbling through the rubble. The air was thick with smoke and dust as the world around her spun. She struggled to regain her footing, her vision blurred by the explosion's aftermath. "Captain." Bryce's voice crackled over the comm. "We're not leaving without you." Elena staggered to her feet, her body battered but not broken. Through the smoke, she saw the war machine, still standing, but its movements were sluggish, its cannon now offline. She had done it. The core had been damaged. "Go. Now," Elena shouted. "We've got a window." The crew, shaken but undeterred, made a run for the Liberty's dawn. Elena's heart raced as she followed, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. They hadn't beaten the war machine yet, but they had bought themselves a moment of reprieve. As they reached the ship, Elena glanced back at the fallen machine, a dark thought crossing her mind. If the Vortk had these kinds of weapons waiting for them, then the battle ahead would be far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "Captain," Bryce said as they boarded, panting. "What now?" Elena didn't answer right away. Her gaze was locked on the horizon, where the stars seemed farther away than ever. She knew now that the real enemy wasn't just the Vortk. It was whatever had given them the power to create such monstrosities. And she was going to tear that power apart, piece by piece. "We press on," she finally said, her voice cold and determined. "We fight, and we win. For humanity, for all of us." As the Liberty's dawn lifted off the planet's surface, Elena knew that the next chapter of this war would be even darker than she had anticipated. But there was no turning back now. The Liberty's dawn soared away from the desolate planet, its engines roaring as it broke through the atmosphere, leaving the remnants of the war machine far behind. The crew had barely managed to escape the trap, but as the ship raced toward the black void of space, Elena's mind remained fixed on what lay ahead. The war machine was just the beginning. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol, a tool. The Vortk had something far worse planned, and they had only scratched the surface. Jax's warning still echoed in Elena's mind. "They're hunting you. They'd been waiting for you. But for what? What was the true purpose behind this cataclysmic war, and why had the Vortk turned their sights on humanity?" Elena stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the endless expanse of space. The stars seemed so distant now, so insignificant compared to the massive battle they were about to wage. But for all the uncertainty, one thing was clear. They were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever known before. "Captain," Lieutenant Brace said, stepping beside her, his voice low. "We've got a lead. Another encrypted transmission. It's from the Resistance." Elena's eyes narrowed. "What are they saying?" Bryce nodded grimly. "They've identified the source of the weapons we've been seeing. It's not just the Vortk. They've got a new ally, a shadow group that's been operating behind the scenes for centuries. A collective of rogue factions, mercenaries, and alien warlords. And they've got a plan to wipe out any opposition, starting with humanity." Elena's heart sank. A shadow group. So this wasn't just about territory or power. This was something more insidious. The idea that there was an even darker force pulling the strings, the very thought made her stomach churn. But this wasn't the time to despair. This was the moment to fight. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. "We've tracked their command center to a remote system," Bryce explained. "It's heavily fortified. If we can infiltrate and take out their leadership, we might be able to cripple their operations. But it won't be easy. The fleet we just encountered, that's nothing compared to what they've got waiting." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of what was about to unfold. She had always believed that humanity had the strength to overcome any challenge, no matter how insurmountable. But this was different. This was a fight against an unseen enemy, a battle of survival, not just for the Liberty's dawn or for Earth, but for the very future of humankind. "We're doing this," Elena said firmly, her voice resolute. "Set course for the system. Prepare the crew. We don't have much time." As the ship adjusted its course, Elena turned her attention to the crew. They had all been through so much, and yet they stood strong beside her, ready to follow her lead into the unknown. They trusted her, and that trust was something she couldn't take lightly. "Bryce," Elena said, her voice softer now, "what's our best shot at getting through their defenses?" Bryce's expression was grim. "We'll have to disable their outer perimeter first. If we can breach their outer sensor grid, we might be able to infiltrate undetected. But once we're inside, we'll have to make our way to the command center and neutralize the leadership. If we don't, they'll send everything they've got after us." Elena nodded, already formulating a plan in her mind. She knew the risks. She knew they were walking into the lion's den. But if there was one thing she had learned through all of this, it was that humanity would never back down, no matter the odds. "We'll split into 2 teams, Elena decided. One team will handle the outer defenses, the other will go for the command center. No heroics. Stick to the plan, and we get out alive." The crew nodded, grim determination on their faces. They had been through hell together, and they knew what was at stake. As the Liberty's Dawn entered the system, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The dark shadow of their enemies loomed closer, and with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. But no matter what awaited them on the other side, Elena was ready. She'd have been fighting for this moment her entire life, the moment where humanity, against all odds, would stand and face its greatest test. In the quiet before the storm, Elena's thoughts drifted back to Jax. Once a friend, now a shadow of the past. She had failed him once, but she wouldn't fail humanity, not again. "Prepare for deployment," Elena said, her voice firm as steel. "This is it." With one final glance at the stars outside the viewports, she turned back to the crew. It was time to finish what they had started. The Liberty's Dawn was ready for the final fight, the fight for humanity's future. And Elena would see it through, no matter the cost.